They say every soul leaves a sound behind when it dies. For my master, it was the sound of bubbles breaking the water, one by one, until there was only silence. My name is Martha, and in the summer of 1855, I learned that hot water can wash more than dirt. It can wash away sin. It can wash away fear. It can even wash away a man. That day began like any other wash day on Jenkins' plantation. Buckets, lye soap, and the sun burning through the fog above the river. But before the sun went down, the same tub that cleaned his linens would swallow his breath. Some call it murder. I call it the only kind of justice a mother can afford. He took my son, Samuel, sold him like he was a mule with muscles to trade. And when they drove that wagon away, something inside me broke that never healed again. I was a washerwoman with nothing left to lose. And a river deep enough to hide the truth. If you care about the stories that history tried to bury, subscribe and tell me which state you're watching from. Because what happened on that riverbank wasn't just revenge, it was a reckoning. 55 South Carolina. One tub, one mother, one drowning. Would you have done the same? The water was my prison and my weapon. Every morning before sunrise, I walked down to the river with my basket of rags and a heart full of dread. The ground was cold beneath my feet, wet with dew and river mist. The air smelled of soap, iron, and pain. I had been the washerwoman for Master Jeremiah Jenkins since I was old enough to stand steady beside a boiling kettle. 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. My hands were always raw. The skin burned from lye soap split from scrubbing. I'd press them into the water and watch red swirl out like it was washing my very blood. Master Jenkins said, I was lucky to have light work. But there was nothing light about washing the filth of another man's world. Every shirt, every bedsheet, every fancy tablecloth. I scrubbed the dirt, the sweat, the sins of his house clean. While my own life stayed stained, he was a thin, pale man, limping through life on a bad leg and a worse soul. That wooden cane of his struck the floor like thunder whenever he came to watch me. Work tap, 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 it was the sound of warning, the sound that made every slave stand. Straighter and quieter. Master Jenkins didn't just own bodies. He owned silence. When he wasn't shouting orders, he was losing money. Cards, whiskey, bets with men who smelled of smoke and easy sin. He gambled everything, even the roof over our heads. And when the debts grew too heavy, he turned to the only things he could sell. Us. The other slaves whispered about it when he wasn't near, that he was running out of land, out of time, out of mercy. But I still believed that maybe, just maybe, he would never sell Samuel. My boy was 17, strong and smart. He had his father's shoulders and my stubborn heart. By day he worked in the fields, but every evening he came down to the river to help me with the washing. We'd talk while we worked. About stars, about freedom, about anything that felt bigger than our chains. Sometimes I'd catch him smiling, and I'd forget for a moment that the world could be cruel. He'd say, Mama, one day we'll be free. You'll see. We'll leave this place and never come back. And I'd tell him, keep hoping, baby. Hope's the one thing they can't steal. I was wrong about that. Because soon Master Jenkins would steal that too. That river was the only thing that knew my secrets. My prayers, my tears, my anger. It carried them downstream, away from the plantation like it was trying to protect me. But the river remembers everything. And one day, it would help me remember who I really was. A mother, not a slave. South Carolina, 1855. One river. 43 enslaved. Hope hung on a clothesline. Do you think history remembers sweat or only signatures? Evenings were the only time the world felt kind. When the field bells went silent and the sun began to fade, Samuel would come down to the river to help me finish the day's wash. That hour between daylight and dark was ours. A small slice of freedom the world didn't know about. He'd roll up his sleeves, still smelling of cotton and sweat, and wade into the shallow water beside me. His laughter always broke the heavy silence that hung over the plantation. Mama, he'd say, you ever think what it feels like to walk without looking over your shoulder? I'd smile even when my hands were bleeding. I think about it every day, baby. That's what keeps me standing. We didn't have books or newspapers, but we had stories. Stories that floated between the lines we hung to dry. He'd whisper about the free states, about runaways who made it to Canada, about ships that carried men who looked like us but walked as free men. He'd say, "I could work hard for myself, Mama, for you. I'd build us a house by the water, with clean floors and no overseer shouting." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold that picture in my mind longer than I held the soap. But every dream on that plantation had a master's name on it, and he could take it away whenever he pleased. When the last shirt was rinsed, Samuel would hang it gently on the line, the white fabric catching the last bit of sun. Sometimes he'd stand still, staring at the horizon where the river disappeared into the trees. "Mama," he'd ask, "you think we'll ever see beyond that bend?" I'd look up too, pretending to see hope in the orange light. "I don't know," I'd tell him softly. "But I know the river's waiting." Sometimes the other slaves would pass by and smile, watching us laugh together like we were breaking some secret rule. A mother and son, still daring to love in a place built to crush love. He'd bring me small things. A river stone shaped like a heart, a wildflower tucked behind my ear. Little gifts that meant, "I see you, Mama. I know you're still human." And I'd thank him for everyone. Because in a world where your name could be sold, remembering your humanity was the greatest rebellion of all. Those evenings were my salvation. But even salvation doesn't last long under a cruel man's roof. I can still hear the sound of his laughter blending with the river's song, and sometimes in my dreams I see that light again, the golden hour when my son still belonged to me. South Carolina, 1855. A mother, a son, and a sky of maybe. Would you risk everything for one person? The morning he came to tell me was hot and breathless, the kind of heat that makes the air feel like a punishment. I was down by the river, halfway through the first load of linens, when I heard that cane tapping on the path behind me. Tap, 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 each strike against the dirt meant trouble. "Martha," he said, his voice flat like a blade. I turned and bowed my head the way I was supposed to. "Yes, Master Jenkins." He didn't bother with small talk. "I've sold your boy Samuel. The buyer's coming at noon." The words didn't make sense at first. They just hung in the air like steam, too heavy to breathe in. "You sold him?" He shrugged, leaning on his cane. "Need the money. Boy's worth a good price down in Mississippi. Big hands, strong back." He said it like he was talking about a barrel or a mule. I dropped the shirt I was scrubbing. The water rippled red where my cracked fingers bled. "Please, Master. Don't, he's all I have," he smirked. "You'll get over it. You people always do." And then he turned and walked away, his limp dragging through the dirt, while my world fell to pieces behind him. By midday, the wagon came. The buyer was a thick-necked man with a cigar in his teeth and a ledger in his hand. He checked Samuel like he was inspecting meat. Fingers, teeth, shoulders, height. Wrote numbers down like he was doing honest business. Samuel stood still, eyes full of fire and fear. "Mama," he whispered, "I don't want to go." I grabbed his hand and held on like I could stop the world from turning. "Don't fight, baby," I said, my voice breaking. "Promise me you'll survive. Promise me you'll keep that light inside you." He nodded, tears mixing with sweat. "I promise." They chained him to the others. 3 men, 1 woman, all sold that morning like things that didn't bleed. When the wagon started to roll, I ran beside it until my feet burned. "I love you, Samuel," I screamed. He turned once, lifted his shackled hands, and shouted back, "I love you too, Mama." The sound followed me long after the wagon disappeared behind the trees, and then there was silence. Only the wind and the river, and even the river seemed to hold its breath. I fell to my knees in the mud, my hands gripping the earth like I could dig him back out of it. My body shook, but no tears came anymore. Only fire. That was the last day I ever felt afraid. Because when a mother loses her child, fear has nothing left to feed on. That night, I didn't pray for Samuel's return. I prayed for his master's end August heat. A receipt, a wagon turning dust into distance. When the law is cruelty, is defiance a crime or a cure? That night, sleep never came. I lay on my cot staring into the dark, listening to the quiet that used to hold my son's breathing. Every creak of the cabin felt like an echo of his voice, until the silence swallowed even that. Somewhere outside, frogs croaked by the riverbank, and the water whispered against the rocks like it was calling my name. I'd washed clothes in that river for 20 years, but that night it felt different, alive, heavy, waiting. It seemed to say, "I've taken stains before, Martha. I can take one more. I thought of every cruelty I'd seen, every lash I'd heard cut through the morning air, every child torn from their mother's arms. Every time Jenkins laughed at our pain like it was music meant for him. But when he took Samuel, he didn't just steal my son. He took away the last reason I had to be obedient. I tried to pray, but no words came. Instead, I thought about his limp, how he leaned on that cane to keep from falling. I remembered the way he always came down to inspect the wash, leaning over the tubs to criticize me. The same tubs filled with water deep enough to drown a man who couldn't stand steady. The plan came to me quiet as a whisper, not in rage but in clarity. I didn't need fire. I didn't need a weapon. All I needed was patience, timing, and the same water that had taken my sweat for years. He'd come tomorrow. He always came on linen day, pretending to supervise. He'd stand in that same spot beside the big tub, his bad leg too close to the edge, his balance hanging on wood and pride. All I had to do was take one step forward and let the water finish the rest. I thought of Samuel's last words. "I love you, Mama." I thought of the chains on his wrists. And I knew that if God was watching, he'd understand. The moonlight slipped through the cracks in the cabin wall, silver and sharp. I watched the shadows move and told myself, tomorrow this house will have one less devil. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, calm like the river before a storm. It was as if grief had burned away every ounce of fear I had ever known. When dawn came, I rose without trembling. The sky was pale blue, the air heavy and still. I washed my face in cold water and whispered to my reflection, "You're not just a washerwoman anymore." Then I walked to the river to prepare his last bath. One weakness. One place. 1 hour of privacy. Would you wait for justice or build it with your hands? The sun rose slow that morning, thick and orange behind the trees. It felt like the world was holding its breath. The cicadas hadn't started yet, and even the river seemed to move quieter, as if it knew what I was about to do. I reached the river before anyone else. The dew on the grass soaked through my shoes as I set up my station, just like every other morning. Only this time, every move was part of a plan. The big wash tub sat near the bank, half in shadow. I pushed it closer to the edge where the ground dipped soft and muddy. That's where he would stand, right beside it, leaning on his cane, complaining about how I worked. I hauled water from the river, bucket after bucket, until the tub was nearly full. Then I built up the fire under my iron kettle, feeding it wood until the flames roared. The smoke curled into the humid air, carrying the sharp smell of soap and lye. I poured the boiling water into the tub, watching steam rise like ghosts. By the time the sun reached the treetops, the water shimmered like glass. It looked peaceful, but I knew what kind of peace hides before a storm. I set the quilts and sheets neatly beside the tub, the kind that always brought Master Jenkins down to supervise. He loved to feel important, even when the only thing he ever did was point and shout. I checked everything twice. His cane would sink into that soft mud if he stepped too close. The edge of the tub was just high enough to throw him off balance. If he leaned forward even a little, gravity would do the rest. Every sound, every smell felt sharper than usual. The hiss of fire, the trickle of the river, the thud of my own heartbeat. But it wasn't fear, it was focus. When the first voices carried from the fields, I knew it was almost time. The others passed by on their way to work, nodding softly to me, their eyes still full of sympathy from the loss of my boy. "Morning, Martha," said Isaiah, one of the field hands. "You holding up?" "I'm managing," I said. He smiled sadly and kept walking, unaware that I was managing something much bigger than grief. The heat grew heavier as the morning stretched. Flies buzzed around the water's edge. I wiped my forehead and took a slow breath, steadying my hands. Then I whispered to the river, "Help me remember. Help me finish this." The current lapped against the bank, gentle and sure, as if it agreed. When the tap of his cane finally echoed down the path, I didn't flinch. Every plan, every thought, every fear went still inside me. It was time. The stage was set, the audience in the trees, the wind, and God already watching. A tub becomes a stage. Steam becomes a veil. Could you keep your hands steady at the edge of fate? I heard him before I saw him. That slow, uneven rhythm, tap, drag, tap. His cane beating against the ground like a metronome of cruelty. "Martha." he barked, his voice cutting through the morning heat. I didn't answer right away. I wanted him to come closer. He appeared through the trees, sweating already in his fine coat, though the sun was barely high. "I told you to start early," he snapped, wiping his forehead with a silk cloth. "Those quilts won't wash themselves." "Yes, Master Jenkins," I said quietly, not looking up. "Water's hot and ready." He limped closer, each step sinking into the mud exactly where I knew it would. Tap, slide, tap. He grunted, annoyed, looking down at the steaming tub. "This water looks cloudy," he said. "You can't even keep it clean for my linens?" I kept my head down. "Let me check it for you, sir. The soap makes it look cloudy sometimes." He leaned forward, squinting. Doesn't look right to me." He shifted his weight, placing the cane too close to the edge. The soft mud swallowed its tip. "That was the moment, you're right," I said softly. "It doesn't look right at all," and I shoved him. It wasn't rage. It was release. Years of bending, scrubbing, bowing, all poured into one push. The sound was small. A splash, a gasp, then a heavy silence. He hit the water face first, his cane toppling beside him. He came up sputtering, eyes wide, hands clawing at the rim. "Martha, help me up!" But I didn't move. He kicked, trying to stand, but his bad leg folded under him. The tub sloshed and rocked, steam rising like fog around his head. He grabbed my wrist, and that was his last mistake. I pressed my hand against his face and pushed. Hard. The water boiled against my skin. But I didn't stop. He thrashed, bubbles breaking the surface. But his body was weak, built for cruelty, not survival. I thought of Samuel's chains, of the sound of the wagon wheels rolling away, of my empty bed. And I pushed harder. His movement slowed, then stilled. Only the sound of the river and the crackle of the fire filled the air. I waited 1 minute, maybe 2, until the water went quiet and his hand slipped from mine. Then I let go. His pale face floated up through the steam, eyes open but seeing nothing. The man who owned my life had drowned in the same water that cleaned his sheets. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I only whispered, "Now we're clean." I stood there for a long while watching the steam fade. Somewhere a bird called, and the world went on like nothing had changed. But everything had hot water, 2 hands, and witnesses. Was this justice or the start of a longer war? For a long moment I just stood there, breathing in the heat and the steam. The world felt still, like the air itself didn't dare move. Then the smell of soap and smoke reminded me, my work wasn't done yet, he was dead, yes. But a dead master always brings questions. And questions could hang a slave faster than a rope could. I had to make it look like the river took him, not me. I moved quickly but careful, just like every wash day. I pulled his cane out of the mud and set it near the tub's edge, angled like it had slipped from his hand. Then I scattered a few bars of soap on the ground, one rolling halfway into the water. I splashed more from the tub onto the dirt. So it looked like he'd fallen forward and the water had spilled. When I looked back at him, floating face down, the steam curling around him like mist, I whispered, "You always said I couldn't do anything right. Guess I finally proved you wrong." Then I screamed, "Help! Somebody help! Master Jenkins has fallen." My voice tore through the air, high, panicked, believable. I pulled at his arm, pretending to try to lift him. His body was heavy, limp. I splashed and cried louder, until the sound carried across the field. Isaiah was the first to come running. "Martha, what happened?" He slipped," I sobbed. "He was checking the quilts and he leaned too far. I tried to grab him, but he fell. Oh God, he fell." Isaiah jumped into the water, pulling at the body. He rolled Jenkins onto the muddy bank, pressing on his chest, trying to bring him back. But it was no use. His lips were blue, his eyes glassy. "He's gone," Isaiah whispered. By then, more people had gathered, field hands, house servants, even the overseer, Crawford, stomping through the mud with his whip in hand. "What's all this shouting?" he barked. Then he saw the body and froze. "Lord have mercy," someone whispered behind me. Crawford's face went pale. "What happened?" I wiped at my tears. "He slipped, sir. The ground was wet. He was looking in the tub. And then he fell." He crouched down, examining the cane, the scattered soap, the marks in the mud. His eyes narrowed, but then he shook his head. "Damn fool. That bad leg of his was going to kill him one day." Mistress Jenkins arrived soon after, screaming and clutching at her chest. She fell beside the body, sobbing into her hands. I stood back, hands shaking, part act, part truth. The doctor came. The sheriff, too. They poked, prodded, and whispered, but none of them found a mark on his body. Drowned, the doctor said at last. Accident, the sheriff nodded. Poor balance, slippery mud. Nothing more to see. They carried him back to the house in a sheet that I had washed myself the day before, the same sheet that would cover his coffin. When the crowd finally drifted away, I stayed by the river. The steam was gone. The water was calm again. I looked at my reflection in it, steady still, and for the first time in my life, I saw a free woman looking back, a story assembled like laundry. Rinse, bring, hang to dry. If truth sinks, should a lie float to save lives? For 3 days, peace hung over the plantation like a fog that no one dared to disturb. The house was quiet except for the sobs of Mistress Jenkins and the creak of the coffin lid as they nailed it shut. They buried him on the hill behind the cotton fields, the same ground his father had claimed with stolen labor and broken backs. The preacher said words about God's mercy and the fragility of life. I stood in the back with the other slaves, my hands folded, eyes lowered, face calm. Inside, I was silent in another way, not in grief, but in knowing justice had finally taken its breath. When night fell, I sat outside my cabin and listened to the crickets. The river moved slow and steady, whispering against the rocks. Each ripple sounded like Samuel's name. For the first time in years, the world didn't feel cruel. It just felt finished, but the devil doesn't stay buried for long. Not even when you drown him yourself. On the 4th day, I heard the wagon wheels again. But this time they brought a sheriff, 2 deputies, and fear. I knew something was wrong before they even knocked. Martha Washington, the sheriff said, stepping into the yard. We need to ask you a few questions. The other slaves watched from a distance, silent, afraid. Mistress Jenkins stood behind the sheriff, pale and trembling. She wouldn't look at me. We've had a new statement, he said. Someone says they saw what happened down by the river. My throat went dry. Sir? He looked past me toward the house. Celia, he called. And there she was. Celia, the house servant with the quick tongue and the jealous heart. She stepped forward, hands twisting in her apron. Her eyes flicked up to mine for half a second before she spoke. I saw her push him, she said. Her voice cracked, but her words didn't. I was by the window. She shoved him into the tub, held him down till he stopped moving. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Mistress Jenkins gasped. The sheriff's eyes hardened. Crawford, the overseer, spat on the ground. And I knew right then, the river couldn't hide me anymore. They took me away that afternoon, hands bound, wagon wheels rattling on the same road that had stolen my son. The same road that had taken everything. In the jailhouse, the walls smelled of rust and mold. A single window let in a stripe of light that fell across the floor like a blade. I sat beneath it and thought about the river. Calm, silent, loyal. It hadn't betrayed me. A human had, but I didn't hate Celia. Not really. Slavery makes people choose between fear and truth. And fear always wins. I just wished she'd waited. Waited long enough to see what justice really looked like. When the sheriff came back to my cell, he asked, "Did you kill Jeremiah Jenkins?" And I told him the truth. "Yes," I said. "I did." He blinked like he hadn't expected that. "Do you understand what you're saying, woman?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I understand it better than you ever will." One voice breaks the surface. "The current changes. Is betrayal ever survival, or just ruin with a witness?" They brought me to Charleston in chains. The jail smelled of sweat, iron, and hopeless prayers. Men groaned in the dark cells around me, calling out for mercy that would never come. But I didn't call out. I sat with my back straight, hands folded in my lap, waiting for morning. I had already made peace with what I'd done. When they led me into the courthouse, the air was thick with whispers. White faces in every row. Ladies with lace gloves, men with pocket watches. All come to see the murdering slave woman. Some looked disgusted. Some looked curious. A few, I think, looked afraid. The judge stared down at me like I was a creature he didn't understand. "Martha Washington," he said, his voice cold and heavy. "You are charged with the willful murder of your master, Jeremiah Jenkins. How do you plead?" I could have lied. I could have cried. But I'd already lied once and I was done with pretending. "Guilty," I said. A gasp rippled through the room. The judge blinked. "Do you understand the penalty for such a plea?" "I do. And yet you still plead guilty?" I met his eyes. "I killed him. I pushed him into that tub and held him there until he stopped breathing." A sound spread through the courtroom. Part horror, part fascination. The judge slammed his gavel. "Silence." I kept speaking. "He sold my son. He destroyed my family. He treated human beings like cattle. I made him answer for that. I made him feel what drowning in grief really means." A woman fainted. Someone shouted, "Hang her!" But I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on the judge. "I'm not sorry," I said. "Not for a single second." The judge slammed the gavel again. "Enough. Sentencing will be tomorrow morning. Take her away." Back in my cell, Reverend Morrison came to pray with me. He was kind. The kind of white man who thought kindness could fix chains. "Martha," he said softly, "you must repent. Murder is a sin. God will forgive you if you confess and seek His grace." I almost laughed. "Reverend," I said, "slavery is a sin too. Did God forgive the men who built it? The ones who sell children from their mother's arms?" He hesitated. "That's not for me to say." "Then neither is my soul," he bowed his head. "You can still save yourself." "I already did," I whispered. That night I slept without dreams. No guilt, no fear, no ghosts. Just the sound of distant water, soft and patient, like it was waiting for me on the other side. A gallows built for one voice too loud to ignore. If repentance erases witness, should you keep it? The morning of my hanging was too beautiful for death. The sky over Charleston was clear, a bright blue that seemed to mock the gallows rising in the public square. From my cell window I watched the sunlight spill across the harbor, ships moving out toward a horizon I'd never reach. The air smelled of salt, wood smoke, and the sweetbread the jailer's wife was baking. Life went on, even when it was about to end mine. They gave me a small piece of cornbread and a cup of water. I ate slowly, tasting each bite like it was a secret. Then I smoothed down my dress, the same one I'd worn the day Samuel was taken, and tied my headscarf neat. If I was going to die, I'd die clean. When the guards came, I didn't resist. Chains on my wrists, steps echoing down the stone hallway. Outside, a wagon waited to take me through the streets. A crowd had already gathered, hundreds of them. Some faces hungry for spectacle, others tight with shame, and behind the white faces at the edges of the square stood my people, slaves from the nearby plantations, dressed in their best, eyes burning with something between grief and pride. As the wagon rolled, I could hear their whispers. "Is that her? That's the washerwoman who drowned her master. God help her soul." "No, child," another voice said. "God used her." When we reached the gallows, the sheriff read my name and my crime. "Martha Washington, you have been found guilty of the murder of your master, Jeremiah Jenkins, and sentenced to death by hanging. Do you have any final words?" I stepped forward and faced the crowd. "I do." The murmurs quieted. Even the birds seemed to pause. "I killed Jeremiah Jenkins," I said, my voice steady. "I killed him because he sold my son. He took the only thing in this world that I loved and traded him for whiskey and cards. He thought his money made him a god, but gods shouldn't drown in tubs. I made him remember he was just a man," someone in the crowd gasped. Others nodded. I kept going. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not sorry. What I did was justice. The kind this world don't give women like me." I looked at the slaves watching from the edge. "To the mothers out there, don't you ever forget what you're worth. To the men who think they own us, we see you too. And to my son, if you ever hear this story, know this. Your mama didn't die quiet." The sheriff fumbled, trying to rush me. "Enough," he barked. But I wasn't done. We are not property. We are not powerless. And one day this land will remember that. He pulled the lever before I could finish. The trapdoor opened. The crowd gasped. For 1 second, I felt the wind rush past my face. Cool, clean, almost like river air. Then the world went still. But my silence didn't stay silent. It carried through every whisper that followed. A voice drops, but the words keep walking. Do you think history loves martyrs? Or needs them? They thought hanging me would end the story. But death only made it louder. By nightfall, the tale had already left Charleston. Whispers carried it down riverbanks and through cotton rows. The story of the washerwoman who drowned her master, and faced the gallows without fear. Each telling grew stronger, shaped by the tongues of those who needed hope. "Did you hear?" They'd whisper in the slave quarters after dark. She held his head under till he stopped moving. Made it look like an accident, too. No, she told them herself, said she wasn't sorry. They spoke my name like a secret hymn, Martha Washington, the woman who fought back. A symbol, a warning, a promise. A month later, another master in Georgia was found drowned in his own well after selling a woman's child. In Alabama, a cruel overseer burned in a mysterious fire. The white papers called them tragedies. We called them justice, but the part that mattered most wasn't the fear. It was the fire. The way my story lit courage in the hearts of people who'd forgotten what power felt like. Even chains couldn't stop that. And somewhere hundreds of miles west in a cotton field in Mississippi, my son heard my name again. A man newly bought from South Carolina whispered it to him, while they picked under the burning sun. "Said your mama made the master pay," he told Samuel. "Said she faced the rope and didn't bow her head once." Samuel stopped moving. He stared out over the endless white fields, the sky sharp and empty. "My mama?" he said, voice cracking. The man nodded. "She said, 'We are not powerless, everyone's talking about it.'" That night Samuel wept until he couldn't breathe. He cried for me, for the life we lost and for the fire I'd left behind. But when morning came, he stood taller. Something inside him had changed. Grief had turned to purpose, the same way it had for me years past. The war came. Samuel escaped and joined the Union Army, fighting beside men who called themselves Martha's boys. They painted my name on their flag. Before every battle, they'd say, "We fight for Martha. We fight for every mother who lost her child to a master's greed." They fought hard. They fought angry. And they fought free. When the war ended, Samuel never went back to the South. He built a school in the North, a wooden building with one bell and a dream behind every desk. He called it the Martha Washington Institute for Freedom. Above the doorway, carved into wood, were my final words. "We are not powerless. We are not property." For 50 years, children walked under that sign. Sons and daughters of the enslaved, carrying the torch I lit by a riverbank. And when Samuel grew old, he told them, "My mama washed the dirt of this world away. The river took her body, but her courage stayed." Now, a century later, a small marker stands in Charleston near the old slave market. It bears my name and a single line beneath it. "She turned wash water into justice. A mother's last wash becomes a century's rinse. Does truth survive best in whispers or in stone?" People say time washes everything away. They're wrong. Time doesn't wash. Water does, and water never forgets. The river still runs behind what used to be the Jenkins plantation. The house is gone now, swallowed by vines, eaten by years. But the river is still there, whispering over rocks the way it always did. If you stand there at dawn, you can still smell the lye and ash, hear the soft slap of wet cloth against wood. Some say that on quiet mornings they hear humming too. A woman's voice keeping rhythm with the current. That's me, still washing, still cleansing the dirt this world left behind. I wasn't born a fighter. I was born a mother. And all I ever wanted was to keep my child safe. But the world I lived in wasn't made for love. It was made for ownership. They told us we were property, things to be sold, beaten, or buried. But love doesn't listen to rules. It finds ways to breathe even underwater. When they took Samuel from me, they thought they were ending my story. They didn't know they were beginning theirs. A story that would follow them, haunt them, outlive them. 'Cause love, once broken, becomes something dangerous. It becomes memory. It becomes fire. It becomes water that refuses to dry. I didn't live to see freedom declared on paper, but I lived to create a moment that pushed it closer. And if that moment cost my life, then so be it. Some stains are worth scrubbing until your hands bleed. I often wonder if Samuel ever stood by a river again, if he felt the wind and thought of me, if he knew the sound of the current was my voice telling him to keep going. Maybe he did. Maybe that's why he built that school. Maybe that's why our name still means something more than pain. And maybe you, the one hearing my story now, were meant to remember too. Because injustice wears new clothes in every century, but it smells the same, and silence always leaves stains that only truth can clean. So remember me. Not as a murderer, not as a slave, but as a mother who refused to let cruelty be the final word. Because the river that drowned him still flows. Clear, steady, honest. It doesn't care about laws or names. It just carries truth. The river remembers. We should too. Do you think history remembers truth or just the winners? Share your thoughts below and watch the next hidden history story.